Hi everyone, and welcome back to Story of the World Highlights. Today we'll be discussing Chapter 36. Chapter 36 takes us through to the end of slave trade in most big Western countries. So let's take a look. So at the beginning of the book, the beginning of the chapter, they talk about a group of people known as abolitionists. One more time, abolitionists. And abolitionists were people that wanted to and supported the end of slavery or the abolishment of slavery. So to abolish something is to bring an end to it, to make it illegal and bad. And these people would go and protest. They would write speeches. They would talk about why this wasn't okay. They would give giant talks to people who were going to listen in the streets. And they really, really worked hard to tell everybody about why slavery was bad and why it should be illegal. Some of these people that thought about it were big people that thought about how men were equal no matter their color. People like John Locke, who talked about how everyone was born like blank slates, everybody. And people like the Quakers or the Society of Friends, who believed that everyone should have equal rights. We also had people in other Christian churches, like Methodist churches, starting to give sermons and speeches about why God did not intend one of mankind to be lower than another of mankind, like John Wesley. We even saw people giving speeches like Angela Grimke and people petitioning Parliament and other governments like Wilberforce. Now, even though we had these people going around and trying to tell about the plight of slaves, plight being difficult situation or difficult horrors that they were facing, people were guilty of it, whether you were from England or United States or north of south of the United States, with regards to ignoring this plight. Now, a lot of people in the North did not support slavery, but the North was not guilty-free. Because in the Constitution of the United States, the North had made it a thing that each slave was only worth 3/5 of a man. So for every 5 slaves, they would equal 3 men. And why did this matter? Well, because there were more people in the South. Because the South bought and sold slaves and participated in slave trade a lot. So they had a lot of people in there, and that meant that they had a lot of people that could count towards votes in the U.S. Now, the North said that wasn't fair. They didn't want the South to have more votes than them. And they realized that the only reason they would have more votes is because of the slaves. So they were really quick to make sure that slaves did not count as a full man in regards to population and voting. So the North was just as guilty of not treating slaves as equals. And that is why a lot of people were petitioning, people in the North and South of the United States, to abolish slavery. Now back to William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce went to Parliament and he petitioned them to stop slavery, but he knew we needed to stop the slave trade first. So he was really petitioning them for a long time to get them to stop. But Parliament at first didn't want slave trade to stop because it made them lots and lots of money. They were part of that triangular trade. They made lots of money selling and buying slaves. But eventually, through lots of petitioning of people like William Wilberforce, the Parliament decided in 1807 to abolish slave trade. Slavery was still okay. You could still have a slave, but the trade of them, the buying and selling, had officially been outlawed. And with that, down here, we see that when people no longer were allowed to buy and sell slaves, it really impacted a lot of income coming into Great Britain. And then in 1808, the U.S. followed with the end of slave trade, just the buying and selling. It wouldn't be 30 more years until the Great Britain Parliament decided to announce emancipation of all these slaves. So now it was illegal to have a slave in Great Britain. So Great Britain, no trade and no owning slaves. by 1833. Now, this Emancipation Act in 1833 in Great Britain caused a lot of problems for slave owners. Now they weren't allowed to have slaves. So a lot of people who had large farms had to either stop farming or they just went bankrupt. They ran out of money because they couldn't afford to pay slaves to do the work. So a lot of people who made and grew cotton and sugar cane and tobacco, they no longer could afford to do that if they had to pay slaves. So a lot of them were no longer able to make those. Luckily for Great Britain at the time, they could still buy them cheaply from the US because it would be quite a long time after until the US finally would abolish slavery in 1865, 30 years later. So this is sort of a look at how slave trade came to an end and the beginnings of seeing slavery come to an end. And that's it for chapter 36. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.